All right. So Hailey, thank you for taking some time out. I really appreciate it. I know you're really busy. You told me that you're on vacation, but I know outside of that, you got a lot of different things going on. So thank you for taking some time to jump on this call with me, man. Everything going okay?
Yeah, it's good. Thanks for having me. I love doing stuff like this. So any chance I get to talk about my profession, I'll do it.
For sure. And if you see me wiping my forehead, it's because I just got out the shower not too long ago and I got water just dripping out my hair. So,
No
be
biggie.
like, what's wrong? Are you nervous or something? Like, yeah, it's partly that too, I guess. But yeah, so I kind of want to start with this. We're coming off about really like a year into COVID. That'll be February, it'll be a year, at least where things shut down out here. I don't know what it's been like where you've been at. But during that time, for me, it's just been a lot of free time, finding new hobbies, things of that nature, spending time with the family. What does that look like for you specifically outside of work? Has it been just a lot of time with the family, by yourself, isolated? Like, what does that look like this last year?
Yeah, it was challenging for me because I'm not near my family. I live in Alabama, so
Right.
It's about a 9.5-hour drive from where I'm at. So I think when COVID happened, I didn't really, not that I didn't take it seriously, but I just didn't know how long it was going to last. I was like, okay, like a couple of months, but then it was like, oh, the basketball games are canceled. Oh, the tournament is canceled. Oh, everything is canceled. And my life revolves around sports. I mean, even when I'm not working, like that's what I do. I watch sports or I go to sporting events, and
Right.
it kind of gives you a second to, I don't know, like reflect on like, okay, what have I actually been doing with life?
Yeah.
So I think for me, the biggest thing was just really leaning on my friends and coworkers because we're kind of all in the same boat. Most of us are in places where we're a little bit further away from our families.
Mm.
So I formed a really good group of gal pals, and we kind of just do like picnics, which was really fun. I think we forget like the little things that you used to do when you were little. But we would do picnics, we would do movie nights, just all those like small things that I think you take for granted when the hustle and bustle of life is going.
Yeah.
So it was definitely an adjustment. I also picked up hiking, which is like weird because I don't really like being outside, but hiking is now like a really big part of my life, which I think is awesome. So I definitely had to do like some digging and some soul searching and kind of figure out like, okay, what do I actually like doing outside of talking about sports?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get to something that you said really quick, but I just kind of wanted to tell you, like, as far as about the people for the people goes, like, this is about you. I want to use this time to shine light on you and your successes, the lessons that you learned through out your career thus far and just throughout life in general. And then also just give you that platform to talk about the things that I think matter to you most. I don't know if you get the opportunity within work or just other settings and things like that, but I think the days of us not addressing some of those serious topics, those days are behind us now. It doesn't mean you have to do that, at your work, but it does mean it's some kind of setting you need to be discussing these things and stuff like that. So that's kind of what this is about, man. I'm just gonna really just let you just, take the show and just, talk about your experiences, things of that nature. But you said something that's interesting about COVID and sports and things like that, because it was probably pretty scary. I know, well, go back a year now, when everything kind of took off, things got crazy. It looked like we weren't going to have sports at all on any major platform, collegiate, professional, anything like that. So for you being on that side of it, was it, how scary was that? Was that a situation where it was you felt like without sports, then were you out of a job? Was it you just went to another, arena within the station that you worked for? And I don't know, forgive me for being ignorant. Do you become the weather lady? Like what was next? What was that going to look like?
Yeah, so I actually remember this day like perfectly. Me and my boss were in our sports office, and we were literally applying for credentials to go to the SEC tournament because Auburn last year, they were, I think, the second seed going into the tournament. So we were getting our credentials, making the plan for when we were going to go up to Tennessee. And that was literally the day that, the teams had already gotten to it. And I remember Alabama literally got off the bus just for them to say, no, sorry, the SEC tournament is canceled. So like literally it was like, we were planning to go, Alabama got off the bus. Commissioner Sankey was like, nah, this isn't happening. And then they had to get back on the bus and go home. And so I think that was like the first kind of like, oh, this I guess is a lot more serious than we thought. And then as more and more things just started getting canceled, like you're right, like there was this sense of like, oh my God, like what am I supposed to do? You know, and I'm really fortunate to work for a station that really values sports. I'm in a really big sports community. We have 7 colleges in our area that we cover, along with the high school and some of the other like youth league and stuff like that. So I'm really fortunate that during COVID, my boss was very adamant about keeping sports in the newscasts because everything was COVID. This is closing. This is, you can't do this, you can't do that, new symptoms. And so it was almost like people needed that break, even if it was, you know, like I did a story once about the Instagram challenges that everyone was doing, the push-up challenges, when people were juggling the toilet paper, just something to give people a break from the COVID. So fortunately, I only had to do one news story that wasn't sports, and it was about fostering puppies. So it wasn't like an awful story, but I mean, it definitely was scary. And I think the more it got prolonged and the more, you know, it was minor league baseball being canceled and the MLB was canceled and then brought back and the NBA. And so it was just, it definitely was scary, but I'm thankful to be in a position where my company really valued what we did and helped us find ways to kind of stay in that realm.
Yeah, absolutely. That's crazy. So I'm gonna nerd out a little bit because I am a Alabama fan, Roll Tide. So do you cover them at all?
Oh, I do.
Okay. So do you have specific sports within the university that you cover, or is that, how does that work? That dynamic? I guess with all of the colleges and high schools, are you assigned specific sports, or is it kind of,
I wish it was that easy. So with local news, typically you're assigned like a DMA, like a market. So for example, my first job was in Great Falls, Montana. So we covered about a third of the state.
Right.
So we covered anywhere from like the Canadian border down to just about South Central Montana. It's kind of the same here in Montgomery, where we cover about a third of the state. But pretty much everybody in the state covers, you know, the big two, Auburn and Alabama. Like when I first moved here a year ago, my first thing I ever did, well, I guess it was my second, but my first major thing I did was the Citrus Bowl with Alabama and Michigan.
I remember that.
So this year I was really fortunate to get to cover Alabama's football team. I mean, I was on the Zoom calls every Monday. We didn't get to go to anything per se just because of COVID, but I mean, we were on the calls. We, you know, I talked to the players, I talked to Saban. We did the national championship, the SEC championship, the Iron Bowl. So pretty much we cover them. It's not exclusive or anything, but I mean, we're involved in all of that. We cover Auburn the exact same way. And we do all the sports too. Usually we focus on the bigger ones. So football, basketball, baseball is getting ready to get started. But yeah, those are pretty much all in our area. And then everyone kind of has those smaller schools like the mid-major. So we have Troy in our area. UAB is like a fringe. They're technically our Birmingham station, but we still talk about them when they do stuff. And then we have some smaller schools too. We have a D2 school, a D3 school, an NAI school, all in our area. And then we also have Alabama State, like literally in our backyard. So and then on top of that, we also cover all of the high schools. So high school football is obviously really big in the South. So we cover high school football pretty extensively. Basketball season, we're now switching into basketball, baseball season. So it's busy. It is, I mean, we do it all. We're kind of everywhere. And I think the common misconception with my industry in particular is, you know, people think that like I just get to show up and I have a glam squad that glams me out and I'm on the sidelines and I'm just talking. And that is the furthest from what I do. Like, I think maybe 10% of my day is talking on camera, and the rest is shooting, editing, setting up interviews, coordinating what I'm going to be doing, and putting it all together. So it's really kind of an interesting dynamic that what the people see versus what we actually do.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's just because I'm interested, what's it like interviewing Saban? are talking with Saban, because I look at him, I adore Saban. I think Saban is legit.
He's awesome.
But he kind of comes off as like he doesn't have a lot of time for nonsense. So I can see that being kind of intimidating. Like if you're not very prepared, or he doesn't seem like you're kind of on your P's and Q's, that he might start to get irritated a little bit. Is that kind of what it's like?
Yeah. So the first time I actually sat in on a press conference with Coach Saban was at the Citrus Bowl. It was the final press conference before the game. So, you have Harbaugh and Saban sitting next to each other and everyone just asks questions. Well, I didn't ask a question, obviously, because it was my first time and I just wanted to see how everything went. And I remember a reporter asked him, a newspaper reporter asked him a question about, because it wasn't as successful of a year. Mind you, they were 11-2. So other, but, so the reporter asked, do you think this is going to affect your players' draft stock because it hasn't as been a successful year in your eyes? And Saban just ripped into this guy. And I remember sitting in the very back of the room and looking back at my camera guy, and my eyes were just like, wow. Note to self, never ask about draft stuff. But one thing I really appreciate about Saban and a lot of these coaches here, Bruce Pearl with Auburn, Nate Oates, even Gus when Gus was here with Auburn, they're pretty frank in what they say. I think a lot of times we as reporters, we have a bad habit of trying to ask things in a way that we're going to get the response that we want. And I think all of these guys here in particular do a really good job of telling you what they're going to tell you, not saying what you want them to say. So the first time I asked him a question, I made sure that it was just very frank. I asked him about Mac Jones and that this was really early in the season. And, he's gone through a couple of games as a starter now. What have you seen from him, and what are your expectations of him going forward? And thankfully, he was just very honest, and it was easy. But I remember texting my family group chat, and I was like, holy cow, I just asked Saban a question. I'm sweating. But I think it becomes one of those things where the more you do it, the easier it becomes. I don't think my heart will ever not beat whenever I have to ask him a question, because he's such a prestigious guy. He knows what he's talking about. And, one thing is gonna, make you be like the dumb reporter that he goes off on. So he's intimidating for sure. But once you kind of learn how his pressers go, it becomes easier, and it's not as intimidating.
For sure. That's awesome, man. I just had to ask about that. Let's go back though, man. I was looking at your bio. You're from Red Oak, Texas, correct? Tell me about Red Oak. Just because I'm always interested where people are from. I'm kind of split. I'm from, I grew up in California, and then I came to Texas when I lived my teenage years, right? Until we moved we're now in Iowa. So I kind of had this split culture, within my childhood. So I kind of had the best of two completely different worlds, and now I'm in the Midwest. So I went from the West Coast to the South to now to the Midwest. So, tell me what does Red Oak produce, I guess, in people? What is Red Oak about?
Red Oak is a very small suburb of Dallas, Texas. We're about 30 minutes south of Dallas. It is extremely country. I literally yesterday when my grandma picked me up from the airport, I was like, oh my gosh, I just always forget how many animals people have here. We're driving into town and someone has a donkey farm. Someone has a goat family, little mini ponies, and everyone has animals. So it's really it's a smaller livestock community, kind of a farmer community. It's really country. As far as what does it produce, I don't know that it really produces much. I think it's one of those small towns that everyone who comes from here kind of stays here, and that's just kind of the cycle of a small town. So I definitely am happy to have kind of moved on and been brave enough and bold enough to kind of branch out to all the different places that I've been.
Yeah. Was that always a goal? When you were a child, did you always have this yearning to see more than what you were experiencing in Red Oak? Or was it just by, happenstance of, where your sports career took you and now journalism and things like that? Was it always a desire for you to get out?
I think once I got to high school and kind of realized that there was more to life than just, your high school community. And I also
Mhm.
had like I don't want to say I had a poor high school experience, but I definitely like, I'm not one of those people who is like, I don't reminisce on high school. Like I'm glad
Yeah.
it's over and I'm glad it's in the past. Um, so I think for me, like once I was trying to decide on, college
Mhm.
and trying to figure out where I wanted to go, like
Mhm.
that's just it. Like I wanted to go somewhere where I was going to go and
Yeah.
have fun. And, like even with soccer, like I was a walk on at Corpus. I didn't even, like when
Okay.
I graduated, I just wanted to be done with everything and just go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I don't know. I feel like I've kind of always been somewhat of a free spirit. And I
Mhm.
think my parents have really encouraged us to always, kind of chase what you're after. And
Yeah.
so kind of just what I keep doing. And slowly
So
I start getting closer to home.
right. It seems like that always happens, and it's crazy. Like, first of all, I didn't even know that you were walk on. I thought you
Hmm.
came on a scholarship and things like that. But how did you feel about Corpus? I mean, you go from Red Oak and then you go to Corpus Christi. We got beaches everywhere. I tell people all the time, I'm like, yeah, I went to Texas A&M Corpus Christi. And I remember my wife, when we were dating, the first time she came down, pick her up from the airport. She went to the University of Iowa, pick her up from the airport. And she's like, you guys got palm trees everywhere. She's like, oh my God, you literally go to school on a beach. And I'm like, well, I mean, kind of, but not really. The beach is like, 30 miles that way or
The
whatever.
real beach you have
Yeah,
to
she's like, no,
drive
no, no, this is a
to.
beach. This is a beach. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm not gonna fight you on that. But yeah, she's like, man, if I'd have known about this, like this is paradise, And I'm like, well, this is just school to me. So I don't really look at it like that. And especially being an athlete, I feel like we didn't, well, at least me, I didn't get to experience maybe as much as the student body got the experience
Hmm.
just going to Corpus. It was really pretty, just ball in school with a little bit of play in between. So how was that experience? I mean, going from Red Oak and then you go to Corpus where you got spring break and it's popping. Like
I loved Corpus, and I talk about that all the time. Like if someone in Corpus Christi were to offer me a job, like I would move back like that. I loved it. I have always been like a water baby. So like
uh
when me and my mom went down for the visit, like I automatically just knew like that's where I wanted to go.
yeah.
I didn't really even consider anywhere else. I also knew that they had a soccer team, and so I knew that if I wanted to play, it was still an option that a new program would be starting. So I always kept that in the back of my mind. But um, I mean, I met some of my best friends in Corpus,
Mhm.
Audrey, Callan, Brooke,
Yeah.
some of those people who I still keep in touch with to this day.
Yeah.
Um, but it was just, I always tell people like, it's just such a different vibe,
Yeah.
like you come to the island and everyone's just chill and,
Hmm.
it's January, but it's 65 degrees and you're at the
Right.
beach. And my
Right.
dogs, like they loved the beach and the water. I just think it was such a low stress environment
Mm-hmm.
that it made it easy to have a really good time. And I mean, also, like I said, like getting to be a part of that brand new program and kind of being a part of that history, being the first walk on that team. I mean, it's really,
Yeah.
it's kind of humbling to think about, but I mean, I love it. I miss Corpus every day. I should visit more often than what I do, but
Yeah.
it was good memories, good 4
Yeah, man. I
years.
can't wait to go back to, man. I talk about great times, man.
Yeah.
Great times. Um, okay, so I saw in your bio you go from studying kines, correct?
I
How
knew
do
you
you
were going
get
to
from
ask this.
kines to journalism, right? Because I was talking to somebody and I was like, for me, I'm starting to do things like this, podcasts and things of that nature. And I don't like to talk like that. So,
Hmm.
if you were to just be around me in person, like I'm pretty reserved, low key. I kind of keep my thoughts to myself, unless I'm around the homies and stuff, then,
Hmm.
more of me comes out. But um, it wasn't until like people start to see a little bit of this in me. I'm not gonna say specifically like podcasting and things, but they were like, oh, like every time you talk, I feel like, have you ever thought about being a motivational speaker? I had somebody ask me if I ever thought of being a pastor. I'm like, nah, man, that ain't for me, man. At least I don't think
Lead the
so,
church
right?
to the
Yeah,
church.
yeah, yeah. Let the church do their thing. I'm gonna stay out of that, right? But is that something that people saw in you early? Any type of way that you could, be on TV covering these big time programs and all this kind of stuff like that? Like, why journalism? Why Kines then journalism? What happened?
So I will preface this by saying I had no idea what I wanted to do. Well, that's not true. I wanted to do graphic design and photography when I went to college. And so when I first enrolled at Corpus, my major was art because in order to be in like a graphic design and photography program, you had to take the prereqs of an art major, which was like drawing, painting, ceramics.
Yeah.
I think second semester, I was supposed to take some sort of like sculpture course. And I was failing like my first semester, and I've never failed anything. I've been a 4.0 student my whole life.
Good for you.
But in art, like I can't really draw. Like we were doing things with charcoal. Like I remember this one project, we had to like take a selfie and then print it out in black and white. And then we had to grid out the selfie with like little tiny, like 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter squares and recreate it in like a large, it was insane. And like I failed because everything that I was doing was so bad. I think the professor pulled me aside and was like, we might need to have a conversation about this, because if you can't pass this class, this is the easiest course in the major.
Wow.
So that's when I knew art wasn't for me.
Yeah.
So from there, in my sophomore year as well, or like my second semester, that's whenever the soccer tryouts were. So I switched to just like a general communications major. But the communications major was more of like public speaking and PR related. And I don't really care to like motivate people per se.
Yeah.
But also I was walking on. So obviously, as you know, like being a college athlete, like you have to maintain certain credit levels towards your degree in order to stay eligible.
Right.
So from general communications, I switched over to athletic training. So then I was doing the athletic training route, and I loved athletic training. But being a full-time athlete and a full-time athletic trainer was exhausting, because I would go to practice at 6 a.m., class at 10, clinicals at 12, back to the weight room, and so I was just exhausted. So then I changed my major again to general kinesiology. And at that point, my coach was like, listen, Boo, you have to stop changing your major, because every time you change it, like your credits change and you're going to be ineligible. And at this point, like I was going into my junior year, and, I couldn't keep switching. So I stuck with kinesiology. And actually, I don't use it all the time, but it's actually, it helps a lot. Like whenever I'm watching a game and I see an injury happen, I'm like, oof, I know exactly what that is. And I know exactly what he's going to have to go through to like fix that. Or, so it kind of gives me, or even being like an athletic training program, it kind of gave me a different perspective on things. But then when I graduated with this kinesiology degree, most people don't even know what kinesiology is. And really your options are, to be some sort of coach or a nutritionist or a strength and conditioning coach. And they sound cool, but I don't know. I just wasn't satisfied. I still have an extra year of eligibility for soccer. So I transferred to UNT as a graduate transfer. And here I am sitting at the table with my parents trying to figure out what this master's degree is going to be in. And my dad's like, well, you're good at talking. Like, why don't you pick something that you're good at talking? And so that's kind of how I got into journalism. I applied for the program on a whim and had to write this long essay about why I was passionate about journalism, and got accepted. But I think looking back on it, there's so much that goes into what we do. I kind of touched on it earlier. There's so much that goes into being a journalist that I think a lot of people don't think about or don't really know about. And I really think that I've like found my niche, because, not only am I good at talking, but also like digging into those analysis and getting to share people's stories. That's really why I got into this business, was to be able to share stories, and particularly with sports journalism. We forget about athletes just being people, right? Like you look at today, Kobe Bryant, your anniversary of him and Gigi's passing. And all I can think about is how Vanessa feels today and how the family feels today. And we just forget that these people who we idolize, like they're people. So that's really why I got into journalism, kind of the transition, and then why specifically I picked sports.
Yeah. So you go from UNT, so North Texas and Denton, correct? All right. So you go from Denton to Montana. Is that the next stop?
Yes.
So you cover rodeo, man, like in 6-man football. Like that is crazy. Like I remember the first time I heard about 6-man football, I'm like, that's even allowed?
Nuts.
Like
it's nuts.
What? Do they score like every play?
The scores would be like, you couldn't even, because with highlights, like, so normally when you go to these games, like we'll take football, for example, you're 2, sometimes 3 football games in a night to fill your show, because football is so popular. So you're only at these games for, maybe a quarter or a half, depending on what's going on and your deadline and how quickly they're moving. And with the 6-man football games, I would always go to them last when I had to, because I knew like, okay, I'm going to be here for 3 minutes and I'm going to have 2 highlights, fast, because that's all it is. It's just trick plays. Like the quarterback takes a snap, they pass it off to the running back flips it to the receiver, and then the receiver takes it down the field, and then they may even like shovel pass it into the end zone. I mean, it's insane. That
is crazy.
Wildest football I've ever seen.
Good Lord. Did you see rodeo in Red Oak? Is that something that you're accustomed to? No.
No.
What is that? How do you cover rodeo? What are you covering?
Rodeo. I tell you what, rodeo is, I was so nervous and I was like, I'm not going to cover the rodeo. Like, gross. But rodeo's a blast. It is like its own world, the way it operates. And I mean, it's an investment. I mean, these cowboys and cowgirls spend a lot of money in their sport. It's one of the most expensive sports, because when you think about it, like your performance is dependent on another living creature that's not a human. You're riding a bucking bronco and trying to hold on for 8 seconds while it's trying to kick you off, or you're riding a bull. You're trying to rope a cow on its horns while your partner next to you on a horse is trying to rope their back legs. I mean, it's insane. Just the respect I have for those guys, like, because when you see what they do on a technical level, I don't even get on horses, let alone like ride a horse to accomplish something other than just riding the horse.
Right.
But I mean, it's a spectacle. It's like a 3-day event usually. There's different levels to the rodeo. There's different events. It was so fun. It was so fun.
Sounds like a party.
It is. There's a giant rodeo in Houston that happens every year that I've never been to. But it's supposed to be a big fun thing, but I don't think it compares to like those small town.
Man, I'm sure you do too, because I feel like there's a lot of people in Corpus from Houston, and I feel like everybody from Houston talks about that rodeo. Like even people that I'm like, I know you have no interest in a rodeo, and they're so excited about it. So I'm like, obviously it must be pretty legit.
It is. I mean, it's fun. It's just like this big, really patriotic, like just like, I don't know, it's almost like when you're at the rodeo, you step into like a different world. Like, and everything is just, it's so passionate, and like the fans are passionate, the announcers, I mean, everything about it is, that is like the number one thing I miss about Montana is the rodeo, because it really was like, it was a blast.
How cold is it get in Montana?
Woo! My first year that I moved there in June of 2018, and July 7th, 2018, it snowed.
No way.
But it got bad. I don't know if you remember the year, it was 2019, but when everybody in the country was freaking out because the Midwest was going through that deep freeze, right? Where that one day where it was going to be just bitterly cold and everybody in the country was freaking out.
The polar vortex?
Yes, the polar vortex.
I was a part of that.
Polar vortex. Okay, so everybody in the country is like lasered in on that polar vortex in the Midwest. Meanwhile, in Montana, the high for the entire month of February of 2019 was like -11 for the entire month. The high. So while everybody is like upset because Chicago's going to be cold for a day, like here we are in Montana, like not leaving our homes. So it got pretty bad. And then it's winter forever. You know, it's winter until July.
Right.
So, it makes it challenging to do the things you want to do. Like football season was like, it started in August, and like the first weekend would be hot and whatever. And then September would roll around and you get your first blizzard, like the first weekend of September. So then you were shooting football games in the snow. And it just got worse from there.
Man, I got to defend that polar vortex though, man. So we moved out here in 2018. And so that was going in 2019. That was polar vortex 2019. So we were in an apartment out here, and I never experienced cold like the Midwest to begin with, right? I'm from California, I'm from, Texas, and then we go even further south to Corpus, right? We never got weather like that. And when I would visit my wife when we were dating and stuff like that, I had been a couple of times. So I'm like, okay, I know Iowa gets pretty cold, things of that nature. And then, like this polar vortex is coming, it's going to be like in the negatives. I'm like, okay, I've had, negative temperatures before. I think I'll be okay. Had to go to work the next day. Wake up, it's like negative. I think we got to like negative 20 or 30 or something like that over here. And
That was
it
Montana
already
all of
snowed.
February.
Jesus. And it already snowed. And like to get out of like our hallway of our apartment to get to our cars in our parking lot was just a block of ice blocking the door. So we couldn't even get out. So my wife was working for a different place, so she had to go to work as well too. But they were like, "Hey, don't come. It's too cold. Nobody's cars are starting and things like that." But it was, I want to say maybe it was the night before or maybe the following evening. But I'm just gonna say for this example or for this story, the night before, temperatures dropping, we're in the super negatives, and it's like probably, I don't know, maybe close to midnight, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. My wife wakes me up. The furnace is not working. I'm like, what do you mean the furnace is not working? So I'm like halfway out of it. I'm like, stop, man, I'm trying to go to sleep. Like, don't, you probably just haven't heard it. Like, stop, leave me alone, right? She gets up, she's like, no, I'm telling you, it's like exponentially cold here. She go checks the thermostat. It's like 61 and dropping in the house, right? So I'm like, okay, so we got to call maintenance. And I felt so bad. The maintenance man had to come over there in that weather, go to wherever he had to go within the apartments to figure out how to fix it. And we didn't have heat for the rest of the evening. So he brought us like some space heaters and we like laid on the floor by the space heaters and stuff like that. It was a bad deal, man. Like, I was like, what did I come to? Like, we having polar vortexes. Like, what is this? Like, that jump was crazy, man.
Yeah, it's definitely like, especially, like when you grow up in a place like Texas where like I think one year we got snow that was enough to stick and you cancel school. I mean, we didn't have school for like 2 weeks when it snowed. Whereas in Montana, like these kids are walking to school like in December when the snow is like this high. So it's just, it's such a different like mindset. And I remember too, like when it was really cold, like down in those negative 20s, like any liquid that you had would freeze. Like your nose, you could just feel your nose like freezing, or like you couldn't wear, like you had to wear a mask because your mouth would freeze, or like your eye, like it was insane. So I am definitely appreciative of our southern weather that we're currently having.
When we get off this call, I actually have to go out and snuggle about probably 6 or 7 inches of snow now. So, it's all good stuff.
I do not miss that.
So again, back to COVID, right? So we're still in the midst of COVID. I want to know, what has that been like for you on the media side of things, right? Like, what adjustments have you guys had to make? I know you already talked about like that uncertainty in the beginning of like, are we even going to have sports and things like that? But what does that look like a whole year of working within COVID? Like, walk me through that. What's that been like?
It was definitely challenging. I think the biggest challenge at first was trying to figure out what's going to go in your shows, because you go from having 5, 6, 7 minutes of content that you're having to condense down to fit into a show to like, oh, I think there's a cornhole tournament happening, like having to try and be creative to, still be a sports reporter. So I think the beginning was really challenging, just finding new avenues and new angles and things to put in a show, which is part of the reason why I came up with my hiking series. It was something that I'd wanted to do when I was in Montana. I just didn't have the resources or like access to certain things. So when I started that hiking series, it was like, okay, well, like I just need something to do. Like I can't just keep doing Instagram challenges, or I can't just keep talking about like more and more stuff that's getting canceled. So the hiking series was really a big part of kind of what carried me through COVID, because not only did it give me a chance to really explore Alabama, I learned that Alabama is the most like diverse state that we have in the country. Like when it comes to terrain, I mean, there's rainforest here, there's Gulf shores and beach, there's mountains, there's rolling plains. So, I mean, there's really, it really helped me learn a lot more about the state. It also gave me something to do, and people really love it. So that was a big part. I think the biggest adjustment was kind of like everybody else, having to learn how to work from home. And to this day, like we still kind of hybrid work at home. I'm fortunate because I'm our weekend sports anchor, and on the weekends is when a lot of sports happen. So
Right.
I get the luxury of going in on the weekends to live anchor. But during the week, like my boss works Monday through Friday and he anchors completely from home, which
Wow.
is it's awful because you're relying on, you know, a lot of other people to help you do a job that's normally really independent. So I think like that initial okay, you're getting sent to work from home. It was like fun and exciting. And it was like, oh, like check out my home set. Like, here's my dogs. Like they also like to be on TV.
Yeah.
But then after like a month, 2 months, 6 months, it's like, oh my gosh, is this ever going to end? So, I mean, I definitely think that just the anchoring aside is extremely challenging. It's a lot more time consuming than what you're used to. Normally I'm used to just like popping in, like going through and I'm producing my show. I'm putting everything, all the elements in that I need to, you know, putting on my makeup last minute before I'm running on set. Everything is just a lot more easy. Whereas like at home, you have to get started an hour early to download all of the videos that you're planning on using because it takes a longer time to download from the server when you're on a home Wi-Fi versus a station Wi-Fi. You know, you're having to set up Zoom calls and you're having to coordinate with producers back at the station to make sure, you know, like the content that's going in is all going to flow and someone else is having to put all the other show elements like your graphics and everything. So it's hard because you're relying on other people to do the job that you're normally used to doing by yourself. And then on top of that, just like the changes that has made our jobs a little bit difficult and even a little bit less fun at times. You know, one of my favorite parts about my job is that I get paid to go to football games. I get paid to go to sporting events and tell you about what happened at those games afterwards. And with COVID, that's kind of taken that away a little bit. Obviously, all of the press conferences are on Zoom. So it's cool because I can, you know, be like this and have sweatpants on. But also like it takes away from that interaction. You don't get to build the relationship with players and coaches and the community really. Like I think I really missed out on that early on, is building relationships with the community because I just couldn't be in the community. So, I mean, there's a lot of challenging things like having to do interviews with like a giant pole. I did a sit down interview with Daniel Thomas, who now plays for the Jaguars. And we did kind of like a one-on-one just talking about like his preparation for the combine. And we have pictures where I'm sitting in a chair and I have like this pole that has my mic on the end of it. And that's how I'm having to interview him, is like holding this pole and having that 6-foot distance. So it has definitely changed the simplicity of what we've done. But what I will say is it has taught, at least me, I can't speak for anyone else, but it's taught me to appreciate everything. I would never complain about having to go to a hockey game ever again, or a minor league baseball game or whatever it is. Like at any time I get a chance to go somewhere, it has become not a burden and more of like, yes, finally something in person.
That's good. That's good. And I think this is kind of really where I wanted to park a little bit. Because with you being in the media, I know you're in the sports side of it, but I really want to hear and have the listeners hear like what a day in the life looks like as far as like the preparation goes for this. Because to be blunt, you know, the last 4 years specifically, I feel like the media has taken a pretty big.
You don't think it's been fun?
Yeah, right. So it's been you guys have taken a hit, man. Or I'll put it this way, you've been perceived to be the bad guy, right? And I don't work in the media, but I always thought it was unfair. And I thought it was kind of ignorant to think that, you know, you guys have agendas and you guys are trying to, you know, come up with this story to get this type of reaction and things of that nature. So you don't have to go through the actual process of everything, because in a way you kind of have already laid that out, especially with COVID. So I understand the details of that. But tell me what your response is to people that believe the media like have this agenda and stuff like that. I'll give you this before you go real quick. I was talking to my sister-in-law last week and I was telling her, I was like, I think it's interesting, and you'll probably appreciate this being on the sports side. Let's say you did a piece on Nick Saban, right? And, you know, you're covering the team, covering him, some success they had or something like that. I've never seen people, I haven't, you may, I've never seen people say, oh, it seems like, you know, she left this information out, or there was an agenda behind that to make Saban look a certain way or the program a certain way. But when it came to anything political, I guess, in a way, there was always the media is trying to do this, the media is trying to do that. And I'm like, you can't have it both ways, man. So back to my question, what was your response be with you being in media to these people that are just so skeptical of everything that you guys are doing now?
I will tag onto your Saban story by saying that people do get fired up. We get emails all the time and phone calls about being unbalanced, or like, for example, I'm wearing a maroon shirt, right? Obviously like Crimson Tide, whatever.
Right.
If I were to wear this on air, right, and talk about Alabama first, let's say I'm leading my show with Alabama basketball because they're the number 9 ranked team in the country. Right. So I'm going to lead with that because it's more important. We would then get an email from Auburn fans saying, your sports reporter wore a maroon shirt. She talked about Alabama. She's clearly biased. We're not watching you anymore because you guys don't cover it fairly.
Oh, Lord.
So I will say, like, in the sports world, we've had issues with that. So like, I will say, it's obviously not as like detrimental. Like if you're calling me biased, okay, whatever. Like I don't care about any of these teams like that. But what I'll say to the agenda speak, and I always tell people this, like not as like a shock value or like as a pity value, but just to kind of bring things into perspective. When I moved to Montana, as a sports anchor and reporter, basically as the sports director, which is the person in charge of the department, with a master's degree, with an undergraduate degree, with 4 years experience of playing a collegiate sport on top of internships with ESPN, Fox Sports, and newspaper experience.
Oh, you just left all that out. You didn't even tell me all that.
But I'm just saying, for perspective, right? All these things. And I was making $20,000 a year.
Good Lord.
$20,000. When you factor that out and do the math, my paychecks every month after taxes were like maybe $600. Maybe. So when you talk about having an agenda, I say that to tell people that we don't get into this business to have an agenda. I don't make enough money. I'm not near anybody, like who, not necessarily people I don't care about, but like, I'm not going to move to a place that I don't know anything about, live below the poverty line just to make up lies. I can do that at home working at Target for $15 an hour. You know what I mean? And so whenever people always talk about us having an agenda, that's the first thing I always say is, anyone who gets in this business doesn't have time for an agenda because we're too busy trying to figure out when our next meal is going to be.
Seriously.
So that's always the first thing that I say. Another thing is like, I don't want to say that I don't care about these communities because I do. I loved the Great Falls community. Some of my favorite people I've ever met have come from my Montana community that I got to cover. Same thing here in Montgomery. I love these communities, but they're not my home, right? These places aren't like places that like, I necessarily have an attachment to other than work.
Right.
So not that I don't care, but like my passion is not in tricking these people because I don't have that investment necessarily. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, not saying that I don't care about the communities because I do. I love that aspect of it. So when people say like, oh, you guys have an agenda, you like telling lies, like I don't have the time or the patience or really like the interest in trying to tell you things that aren't true.
Right.
It's silly. And I think what's really challenging is, being in a place where you don't even necessarily get to defend yourself. Like you hear these things from our former president, like the media is fake. All they do is say lies about me and da-da-da-da. And so now like all of a sudden these people are having these, assessments of who you are without even knowing what you go through, or knowing like anything about our processes. I've deleted so many people from my high school off of Facebook because of just the pure ignorance of it. And so I get really fired up. I get really passionate when people try and undermine what we do because people don't know what we do. People don't know that, like at least thankfully I do sports, but like from our news side of things, like when we were covering COVID, like one of my coworkers was like in the midst of it all, like she was out in the tent. Like, I don't know if you remember like when COVID first happened and they had those blue tents where, like if you thought you had it, like that's where you would go. That's where she was. Like she was putting herself like on the line to learn more about this so that we can share it with y'all. And, people don't think about that, or people don't think about how like, you're trying to have these open conversations with people, and all they can say is like, no, we can't listen to you because you're the media, you have an agenda. Like the only agenda that I have is making sure that my show is filled to the 4 minutes that I'm allotted to fill. Like that's my agenda.
Right.
And so I think like, I don't know, it gets hard because even when you try to explain to people like, hey man, I'm just here to ask you your thoughts. Like it doesn't matter what you say or what you do. Like people are always going to just like naturally assume like, oh, you're the media, you're bad, I don't want to listen to you. And I think also there's a huge misconception between like national news versus like local news. Like national news, like absolutely, like NBC is definitely a little bit more left leaning in their coverage. Fox is definitely a little bit more right leaning in their coverage. Like that's not a secret. But I think where the difference comes is just because you lean towards one side of the spectrum doesn't mean that you can't give all the sides of the facts. And people just instantly assume that like, oh, she works for NBC, she's a liberal, she's a snowflake, she's the leftist media agenda. And you know, so it definitely gets frustrating because a lot of the misinformation and the misconceptions of like what goes on in this business. But journalism is hard. Like I said, it is not fun. I mean, it's fun, but it's definitely not what people think. Like you don't just show up to places and have people do the things for you. Like
And I think that's one of the reasons why I was very excited to get you on, because that's something that fires me up, and I don't even work in that industry, you know, because it doesn't make sense to me. And I think it's just very disrespectful in a way, right? We don't do that to other people in other industries with their work, you know, and people are so like loose-lipped with that nowadays, where they just throw that out. And one thing that you brought up that I was going to ask, and you basically answered it, was like, I look at it as, like you said, like your national news coverage. Although they may lean towards a certain, you know, way when it comes to politics or just anything in general, that doesn't mean that they're not still reporting facts, right? So the facts are still the facts, and we need to keep it there. And I always think about it like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's more about maybe like the verbiage they use, or honestly, for me, that's just kind of how I look at it. The way I see it is like, it's probably just the way they explain the story, maybe, you know, but it doesn't change the fact that if somebody got shot, you know, they're not going to say that person fell off a building, you know what I'm saying? So like, it's those types of things where, I get really, really upset about that. And like, you know, when I started to see that you were in the media and stuff like that, I was like, man, it's just disrespectful. That's just the best way for me to put it. It really is. Like, everybody's sacrificing in some type of degree, right? Whether it's in your job or just in life general, we all got sacrifices we have to make, and we all are doing things that people don't see, right? Our efforts go unnoticed, and for you to just immediately say like, discount everything that somebody has put into their craft, what they're doing, by saying that they're lying, is, you know, it sucks. And that's why I wanted to have you on here to kind of defend that in a way, you know, like, I don't think people get an opportunity to hear somebody in the media say, guys, like, you basically sound stupid, you know, like, that's basically what you need.
You know, and it's so interesting that you bring up the fact of like how we don't do that for other people's jobs. That's like one of my favorite things to always put back on somebody is, you know, like the hateful messages that we get. I'm like, yo, imagine if someone just sent that email to your daughter. Imagine your daughter calls you and says, Dad, like, listen to what this man just said to me. You would be furious, right? And so it just, we've taken that human element out of what we do. People forget that, like, I go home and feed my dogs after work every day, just like anyone, you know, would with their kids or their dogs or whatever. Like, I still go to the grocery store and the gym, and I do all these normal things that people do. And you hit the nail on the head. You know, I would never show up to your bank and yell at you and say, you're a terrible banker, you know, you don't deserve to work here, you're a liar, you cheated me out of this, and I don't have the proof to know that you cheated me out of it, but I'm going to yell at you anyways and tell you that you're a cheater because that's what someone else told me. I don't do that. I don't show up to my mom's work, who's a teacher, and yell at my mom for being a teacher because, you know, my kid's not learning the information, you know, like, we don't do that with other professions. But again, like, I just think that, like, because it's been enabled by our former president and because it was so encouraged, at that point, like, it doesn't matter who you're cheering for presidency. It just comes down to like a moral decency. And I think that's where the discrepancy comes from, because people stop seeing it as we're talking about a man who has discredited every single type of human being in every way possible over and over again. Politics aside, like, we don't even have time to talk about the political side of thing. It's just like, look at who he's insulting now. And I think that's where the confusion comes from, because if you are like, if Trump was like your guy, like hearing everyone constantly talk about, you know, like all of the awful things that he was doing and probably will continue to do, was probably hard to hear. You know, like I imagine like if they were saying the same things about Biden, it would be hard if you're a Biden supporter as well. And I think that that's where the difficulty comes from, and the fuel of the hatred towards the media, because it was like, well, Trump is saying you're bad people. All you're doing is talking about all the bad that Trump's doing. Therefore, like 1 + 1 = 2. And so like, that's still where that, you know, association. And now I think it is hilarious and like so ironic that, you know, like this guy who spent 4 years tearing us down is now limited to sharing his statements through a journalist. He doesn't have access to his social media to do it himself. If he wants a statement out, he has to give it to someone else to put out into the press. And so it's just so crazy how things come full circle, and you know, here we are.
That's crazy. And to kind of get into the political side of things really quick. So we witness history, January 20th, right? We get our first minority female vice president. Explain to me what that meant to you, and if you talk to other women just in general, if you could speak on their behalf, like, what does that day mean?
Well, I think the inauguration was important, but I think that the day that was more important than the inauguration was the day it was finalized and it was announced that Biden and Kamala had won. And I remember being at work with like a couple of my girl coworkers, and I don't ever change my work TV off of sports, like ever. It always stays on sports because I don't really care about anything else. But when it came time for them to speak for the first time, I changed that TV and all of us just stopped what we were doing to watch her speak. And I am not a big crier, you know, like I don't cry very often. And I remember all of us just standing there in tears thinking about like, holy cow, like finally someone, you know, like I have a little niece and I just think about like my little curly headed, dark skinned niece is 2 and she's not going to have to worry about growing up without an idol, you know, like we did, you know, like that check mark has been done for her. Wow. And so I think that moment, not taking anything away from the inauguration because it was just as powerful, but I think for me, like that moment of just finally seeing like, oh my gosh, like here we are, like we've done it. Like, it was just mind blowing. And, you know, you think about all of the things that women have done just in the last year, the way we have continued to pioneer through everything. It's amazing. Women are awesome. Black women are awesome. And I think it gives us like having someone like Kamala, who not only represents Black women, but like you said, she represents minorities and just women in general. Like I don't think you can fully understand unless you are a woman, like how big of an impact that is. But like that is telling every single little girl out there that like you can do whatever the hell you want to do because it's all like we're all the same. And so it's empowering. It's refreshing to know that when I turn on the TV and we're getting those press conferences, like we're getting a fresh perspective. We're getting a perspective that maybe we can understand a little bit better, and having that representation is so important.
Yeah, I say it all the time, man. Representation matters so much. And I like to ask this question with my biracial friends when I get a chance. I'm Black. All I know how to be is Black. You know, my wife is white. Like I said, we have a 6-month-old, right? So I have a biracial son. I don't know what it's like to grow up biracial. right? I don't know what that's like as a child. I don't know what that's like just going through life. I know it's like being a Black man, right? And I had a friend come over last week, and he was talking like, and we had two friends over. One of my friends is Black. He's African. He's from DC, Maryland, Virginia. And then my other friend, he's biracial, right? And he asked the biracial one. He was like, "Hey, man, so I have a question." And basically, the question was, or I guess I'll put it more a comment than question. Basically, he was saying it's interesting that let's put it in a school setting, right? So say we're in school and there's this new biracial kid that comes to the school. The Black community within that school usually will claim that biracial kid more than the white community does. And it made me think about, I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting to me because I even think about, let's put it in sports now. Say they say, you know, we got 4 of the top quarterbacks in the NFL are Black, right? And they'll put like Pat Mahomes in there. Well, Pat Mahomes is biracial, right? So the fact that he just goes straight to Black, right, is kind of just intriguing to me. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying like, why?
It's interesting.
Why do we automatically just go straight to Black and not say that they're a white quarterback, right? Or just leave it as biracial, whatever that dynamic would look like. But my question being, talk to me what that was like for you growing up. Biracial kid, you know, like help me out, right? What do I need, I guess, to prepare my son for and have the talks with him about when it comes to these things?
You know, it was rough. Red Oak is a predominantly white community. Like I said, it's a farming community, so it's predominantly white. Just, you know, not, there's a lot of Hispanics, but also like not a whole lot of Black people within the community. And my first realization that like, because the biggest challenge that I always had, and one of my best friends, Christina, who's also biracial, we had the same problem. We were always too white for the Black girls, but too Black for the white girls. So we never fully fit into one side or the other because like, you know, like I can't dance and all the Black girls can dance. So well, you're not really Black because you can't dance. But then the white girls, it's like, oh, well, like you don't have long, flowy, straight blonde hair. So like you're cool, but like you're our token Black friend to show like, oh, you know. And so I remember like my first understanding of like being in that like space. Well, I was in the 4th grade and we were at recess and we were like on the swings or something. And like, obviously like my hair is like curly, kinky, huge mess right now, but you know, whatever. Likewise. Well, my mom, like growing up, she never really knew what to do with our hair. So she would just brush it out and put it in a ponytail, you know, because like, that's what she does with her hair. She brushes it out and puts it in a ponytail. And I remember being at recess and we were on the swings and one of my friends kind of came up and she like grabbed at the, like the little, I call this my fluff because it's always the part that like doesn't lay flat. I remember she like grabbed the fluff like this and she was like, why does your hair look like that? Why doesn't it just lay down like ours? I'm in 4th grade. Like I have no idea. Like, I don't know. My mom puts my hair in a ponytail every day. I don't know what it does. And then after that, you know, I was just kind of like, oh, I don't know. Like, that's just how it is. After that, those were like my little white friends. After that, going back into class, like after recess, and then asking my Black friends, like, hey, like, they asked me at recess, like, why my hair doesn't lay down. Like, why doesn't my hair lay down? And they're like, I don't know. You don't have naps like we do. We have our edges laid. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, what is, do I need my edges laid? You know, like, and again, like you're in 4th grade. So how old are you when you're in 4th grade? You're like 8 or 9, you know? So like, here I am, like having this existential crisis at school. Like, my hair's not laying flat like the white girl's ass. And like, now the Black girls are telling me like my edges aren't laid. Like, oh, hell. And so that was like my first, like, you know, like, oh my gosh, like I am different. And then, like I said, just growing up, like I have straightened my hair for 25 of my 26 years of life on this earth. I have always had it straight. I have never, until recently, felt confident wearing it curly because I've always been in environments where straight equals professionalism, right? Or straight equals beauty. And so I can't remember who I was, cheesy, but I was watching The Bachelor last night and listening to one of the women speak about her same experience. She's like, like I would get anxiety going to sleepovers because, like I'm going to sleepovers with all of these girls who have this beautiful straight hair. They can put rollers in it and it's curled, or they can put a wand through it and it's, they can just style it. And like, I can't do that. And she was just explaining her anxiety. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is me on the TV.
Wow.
And so I think what I have just kind of come to accept is, like when people first see you, I think they understand like, oh, she's not full black, but she is black.
Right.
Right. And it's easier for people to associate someone who's biracial with being black, because I think we almost identify with the black community more, like you said, like the black community is like, okay, like that light skin's ours, you know what I mean? And it's easier, I think, to assimilate into that black culture, because no matter, I could be like my niece, for example, my niece is 75% white because my sister is half black and half white. And then her husband is white. So she's got a little bit of black in her, but the white is dominated.
Right.
But when people see her, they see her as black.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like no matter how much you have 1% black in you, but if that skin is not white, you're black.
Right.
And so I think it's like, for me, I have just kind of come to learn that like, I naturally fit in with the black community a little bit better, just because like I'm understanding a little bit better. Like they help me figure out how to deal with my curls on my head. Like a white person, I don't think would be able to necessarily help me with that. Or, like I remember when I was in Montana, I had to special order makeup because in Great Falls, they didn't sell makeup for my skin color because there wasn't enough black people in the community to make a profit off of selling makeup for dark skinned people. That's a problem that only a dark skinned person can relate to,
right,
or a darker skin, I should say.
Right.
So I think it's a challenge just because like you're constantly trying to like find your identity, and you're trying to be like, yes, I'm biracial and I'm proud, but you're also like, but also I'm black, but also like I'm white, but I associate with the black side more, but also like I know what it's like to be white because my mom is white and my grandma is white and half my family is white. So I don't think that it'll ever get easier. I think it'll always just be like this, like kind of awkward thing where it's like, yeah, well, I'm black, but I'm not black. I'm half and half. But I guess I've never really thought about like the Patrick Mahomes example you use. I've never thought of that. I've always just been like, yes, 4 of the top 5 black quarterbacks are black. Like, that's interesting.
I think I was talking to one of my buddies the other day, and I grew my hair out like when we moved out here because I didn't have the money to pay for haircuts all the time, right? So I'm like, I'm just gonna grow it out, whatever. And I was working in the industry at that time where I didn't think it mattered that much, right? I was working at a gym, and my hair is super long now. I braid it all the time and things like that. I've never had my hair this long ever in my life. I always had a fade. And I've been growing it out for like almost 2+ years now, super long, to do all these different things with it. And I was talking to one of my friends. I put a Snapchat story up, and I had just taken my braids out. My hair was like all kinky and super curly. I never had like that before. I was like, bro, this is dope. Like I look icy, like or whatever. I'm like, I like this. So I'm like calling my mom, like, so does this happen every time you take your braids? How your hair get like that? She's like, I'm just trying to like finesse it, right? And but anyway, I put a Snapchat story up and he playing with my hair, and then my friend hit me back because he's growing his hair out. He's trying to get dreads, and he was like, how long you been growing your hair out? And asked me questions, stuff like that. And I was like, man, for me, I've started to feel like so much more pride in being a black man, having my hair the way it is, right? So having it be curly and kinky and all these different things like that, and like, I don't know, it like gave me a sense of pride that I didn't think it was going to do. I thought it was just going to be just, it's just hair, right? And then the more I have, I'm like, wow, like this is like becoming a part of me. And I don't know if I'll cut it, ever again. It's like, it's just like all that kind of stuff like that. And I was telling my wife that, and she was like, why do you think women always cry like we get our hair cut or something like that? And I was like, I get it now. But yeah, man, that dynamic is crazy, man. I gotta get her, I guess, in the class or something. Maybe she needs to talk to you so we can figure out what to do with his hair.
Well, I'm not the one because I'm still figuring it out. Like literally, I'm so thankful. One of my best friends that I met in Montgomery is also a biracial girl. Her name's Madison. She's got this beautiful, like just beautiful long curly hair, and I'm obsessed with it. And she was actually the one who told me, like, she was like, living in Alabama, you're not going to be able to wear your hair straight because it's humid. Like in the summer, I would straighten it and I would go outside. It's like Corpus, but like 10 times worse because it's muggy and gross. So I would do, like, for our Friday night football shows, for example, my 4 o'clock live hit, like, okay, like it would look cute. By 4:30, here we are. Okay, like the puff is puffing. By 5 o'clock, it was like, okay, like I need a headband, I need a bobby pin, I need something. By 6, it was up in a bun. And so, you know, like it just became too much. And she was like, you're gonna kill it by continuing to straighten it every day. Like, you know, like it's not worth it. And so she has been so influential. Really all of my friends have been so influential in, you know, like helping me walk through. I've had friends come over and like try and teach me how to do a twist out. Or the big thing I'm dealing with right now is I just had to chop a bunch of it off because they're like, well, it's not going to curl right if it's, you know, dead. So then I had to go and I've had to get it cut 3 times now, which is, like you said, it's mortifying because you're like, it's my hair. But I think just having people around you who can kind of support you and kind of show you the ropes. Like I'll call Madison all the time, like at Ulta, and I'm like, all right, I'm in the hair aisle. I tried this, it didn't work. Like, what should I do now? So just having like that community of help is like really beneficial. Cause like even still to this day, I'm like, oh, it looks good today. Like, I don't remember what I did though. So I'm gonna have to figure out how I did it this time.
I feel that. All right, last 2 questions and then I promise we'll be done. So we kind of touched on the politics side of things a little bit, but you know, for you, what is your hope for America going forward, right? So we just came off of a tumultuous 4 years. There's a lot of healing needs to be done, rebuilding, but you know, we got our new administration in, and then we have this minority female as a VP as well, right? So what do you hope that they start to tackle as far as issues or things they start to bring up and shed light on? Like where do we go from here, in your opinion?
Well, I think they've already started doing a great job. I mean, just with Biden repealing like the transgender ban in the military, like, I mean, I feel like that has helped so many people already. But like my biggest hope is that we can just get back to a place where like we remember that people are people. Like I know I've said that 100 times like in this conversation, but like I think within my business, it is so important to remember that people are people, you know, like I'll give you an example. My grandpa passed away 2 years ago. And I found out 10 minutes before I had to do my 9 o'clock show that my grandpa had passed away. So I essentially had 10 minutes to cry, retouch my makeup, get myself together, walk on set, and hi, welcome into the SWX studio. I'm Hailey Sutton. Let's start talking about sports. And, you know, like, thankfully no one said something, but like, let's say like maybe I cracked a little bit in that and got an email from somebody saying like, oh, like your sports girl didn't do the best job today. You know, they had no idea what I was going through. And I say that because that's with everybody, you know, like we have no idea what anyone is going through ever. And I think that we have lost that in this last 4 years. Like you said, it was tumultuous. Like we're just so good at pointing the blame at other people and putting the faults on other people rather than just understanding like the whole purpose of this country was that we were built to agree to disagree. Like I think that's the definition of America, is agree to disagree. There's 2 different parties. You can believe what you believe. I can believe what I believe. And at the end of the day, like we can still live together in harmony.
Absolutely.
And so that's my hope. I hope that like this administration can find a way to kind of satisfy both parties. I know Biden's big thing is he's been saying, you know, I'm going to advocate for the people who are Biden fans, and I'm going to advocate even harder for the people who are not fans of me to show like we're going to come back together and we're going to, you know, do this together. And I think when you add in Kamala Harris giving that representation, but also like representation aside, like she's a badass woman. You know, like she's going to bring her own flair to the presidency as well, very similar to like Michelle Obama did with Barack. So I think when you have that mix, my hope is that, you know, we can kind of get back to being like, hey, I respect your decision because it's your decision. Whereas like, I think in the last 4 years, it's been like, I can't support Trump, not because he's a Republican. I can't support Trump because he is a racist or because he is a homophobe or, you know, X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, like getting back to, I guess, having like Republican versus Democratic problems and not like human interest in like people problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And then the last one, what's next for you, Hailey? You're at the studio in Alabama. I don't know how to tell on yourself if you got things in the works or anything like that. But I want to see you, selfishly. I want to see you on like, you know, ESPN or like Fox or something like that. I like Fox more than ESPN. If I get my
I think I like them better too.
But yeah, man. What's next for you? What do you want your legacy to be? I guess let me put it that way.
As far as what's next, I am pretty locked into Alabama for a couple more years. I signed a 3-year contract, so I'm here in Montgomery for another 2 years, which I mean, I'm okay with. I'm in a good place. I get to cover really cool stuff. So no real complaints. As far as what's next, obviously, like I don't have a plan in place yet. My goal is kind of your goal. Like I would love to be on the sidelines of ESPN somewhere, but also I think the biggest thing that I always try to advocate for is telling people stories. Like if you look at my website, the first thing on my website says, like we talked about earlier, people forget that athletes are people too. And that's why I got into this business, is just to constantly remind people like, hey, like even though LeBron James just went absolutely ballistic last night against the Cavs in the fourth quarter, he still goes home to his wife and his kids and has to pay the bills. You know, or, you know, like he still goes through the traumas that regular people that you and I go through. So I guess for my legacy, I never had anyone ask me that
thought about
before. I don't know. I guess I just want to continue to inspire people, you know, like to kind of just do what makes you happy, to do what, you know, do what fuels you, I guess. Like, don't let the mean fourth graders tell you that your puff isn't good enough.
Nah. I like to ask that question, man, 'cause I think it's worth exploring, man. Like, especially with something that you're doing, you have impact whether you know it or not. Just kind of like what you were talking about, how you view Kamala and what happened with that situation. Like, even though you may not have somebody telling you, there's gonna be girls looking up to you as well, right? And probably are already. So, actually, I know that for a fact. You know, if you think about like when we were in college, right, and we're playing sports, and you got the little kids out there that just like think you're the best, right? You don't even know these kids, right? But like every time the game's over, they're just like, oh my God, you guys are the best. And the same thing applies for what you do now. You know, people get to see you, and if you're at these events as well, they're probably like, oh, look at that black lady right there. Like, I want to do what she's doing, you know. So I'm proud of you. I think you're doing an amazing job.
Thank you.
Keep working hard. I'm excited to continue to watch your journey and see everything that you're doing, all your successes. And again, thank you so much for being willing to be on this call. And I learned a lot about the media and rodeos and 6-man and all that kind of stuff. So I'm pretty hyped about that.
You gotta go to at least one in your life.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and get that done though. But yeah, that's all I got for you today.
Awesome. Thank you. Right. This was so fun.
No problem. Thank you. I hope to catch up with you soon.
Yeah.
All right. We'll do so. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here.
All right. Bye.
All right. See ya.